Welcome to the Bedrock Way Podcast, where we're changing the habits of yesterday by creating the new healthcare reality of tomorrow. And Jonathan, today we have a very special guest, and oh my goodness, I got chills sometimes. Chills sometimes when I have a really good, fun guest. And today I have a very distinguished guest, Dr. John Porter, the trauma surgeon out of a local hospital, Cooper University Healthcare. And we'll talk a little bit more about his background, and I'll let him introduce himself. But it's really a privilege to have a physician who is in a very distinguished part of healthcare and who sometimes, unfortunately, doesn't get the credit that they deserve. And one thing about the Bedrock Way podcast is we are an outlet, a platform, a voice, right, for those clinicians, those leaders, non-healthcare or healthcare, those guys that are constantly working thankless jobs, because a trauma surgeon is a thankless job. It's a thankless job, Jonathan, because they're expected to save a life. But nobody sometimes thinks of their life. They also have needs. They also have worries. And I think being a trauma surgeon on the heels of the pandemic was probably one of the worst professions to be in, because you didn't know what to expect every single day. You didn't know the misery, the tragedies that were going to happen on an everyday basis. We were, as a industry, we were lost. We were looking for answers. And the surgeon's supposed to have all the answers. A surgeon's supposed to be perfect. A surgeon's supposed to know everything. And on the physician healthcare hierarchy, they are the top financially, professionally. Today's podcast title is From Tragedy to Triumph, a trauma surgeon's journey. And it is a pleasure to introduce Dr. John Porter. Welcome to the Bedrock Way Podcast.
Thank you, sir. It's my privilege to be here. I've never had such an amazing introduction. I wanted to turn and look to my right to see who was actually being introduced, because I wasn't sure it was me. But there's no one sitting next to me to my right. So it must be me. And thank you for having me here. And I love the title. And I'm going to take it into a different place that you may not have expected, because from tragedy to triumph. So 60 years ago on November 22nd, everybody remembers what they were doing if they were alive.
Of course.
I was 4 years old. I was watching Romper Room. And they interrupted Romper Room and said, the president had been shot. So I went downstairs, told my mother that the president had been shot, and she said, stop telling stories. So there's two parts about that. One is that I do remember it. The other one is that I've been telling stories my whole life, and so you're going to get stories today. She came upstairs, saw that the president had indeed been shot. 2 days later, everybody remembers what happened. They were sending Lee Harvey Oswald from jail to prison on live TV, and Jack Ruby came up and shot him. As a 4-year-old, I said to my mother, I'm going to grow up and be the doctor who takes care of the president if he gets shot. And I decided that I was going to be a trauma surgeon, even though I didn't know what a trauma surgeon was at age 4, but I knew that I would take care of the president if he got shot. And there's two interesting things about that. One is that seemed to start my life. I have no memories before that. But after that, I remember playing baseball in the backyard with my dad. I remember hitting the baseball next to the chicken coop. And then he couldn't go get the ball because the rooster came out of the chicken coop and thought it was an egg and wouldn't let him pick up the ball. So the baseball game stopped. I remember everything after the Kennedy assassination. So it also started my life. But now with the Capitol program, which is when the president travels across the country, they always go ahead of time to a trauma center, and you get the president's chart. You talk to Secret Service, the White House medical staff, and you figure out what you're going to do, where you're going to put them, where's the press going to be, and all those sorts of things. So in several states, I've gotten to do that. So from the age of 4, when I said that I would take care of the president if he got shot, to my current state, whereas if the president happened to get shot in the city where I was working as a trauma center, I would take care of him. And I would venture to say that you haven't interviewed anyone who said what they were going to do at age 4 that they end up actually doing.
You said something very, 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 very interesting. There are 2 days in our lives that we consider the most valuable, Dr. Porter. Number 1 is when we're born, and number 2, the day that we find out why. And the average age When people find out why, there is none. Because some people find out, some people don't. But the very miraculous of our existence cannot be understated, that we are here for a purpose. We are here for a mission. We are here to live out a meaning that some of us find out very early on, some find out later on. You were privileged enough to find out at 4 years old.
That's correct.
And that's an incredible attribute. So since we're on that topic, take me from 4 years on to your medical school.
So it's interesting. I was the youngest of 7 boys. There were 6 between the ages of 11 and 1. And then my parents took some time off, but they really wanted to have a girl. They tried one more time, and they actually had stillborn twins, and one of them was a girl. And so I always thank that girl for not being alive, because if she had lived, they wouldn't have tried anymore. So they tried one more time, and it was very interesting. I made the newspaper on the day I was born, because back in 1959, they were doing air raid warning practice, and my father was taking my mother to the local hospital in labor, and he didn't stop. You were supposed to pull over during air raid warning. And the police pulled him over, and he said, she's already delivered 6 boys. This one's not going to wait. And so the police said, we'll escort you to the hospital so no other police stop you. And so then the local paper said, boy born under a police escort. So I was famous even before I was born.
I love it.
and so, but growing up, the youngest of 7, we were poor. We didn't have hot and cold running water until I was 5. We didn't have heat in the house other than the kitchen stove until I was 6.
Wow.
And this was upstate New York when winters used to get cold. When I say upstate, since you said you were a Met fan and a Giant fan, I don't mean Yonkers. I mean upstate outside of Albany, where it got cold.
Yep.
And so I grew up poor. I did not know I was poor, however, until I went to college, because everybody in the town was poor, worked at the factory and did all those sorts of things. And my mother ended up taking a job cleaning toilets for the state of New York. And so no one talked to me about going to college, because she took that job to pay for 2 of my older brothers to go to college. And she wanted to retire from that job, so she never talked to me about going to college. But I ended up being relatively smart, graduated first in my class, and did well on the pre-SATs. And so Davidson College, which is in North Carolina, was getting ready to lose some of their funding because they didn't have enough black students. So they said if I would come and visit, they would pay for it. I played all 3 sports in high school, and I couldn't decide if I wanted to play football or baseball in college. All the places that had scholarship for football wouldn't let me play baseball, and vice versa. When I went to Davidson, many of your listeners won't understand this, but I brought an 8mm film with me to show my football highlights, and I brought my stats for baseball.
Stop.
And I interviewed with the school, but then I also said, can I meet with the baseball coach and the football coach? And so they said I could play football and baseball, but they gave me an academic scholarship.
Wow.
And then I said, what do I need to do to get into medical school? So I took all those classes, but I also wanted to major in something else. I majored in English and philosophy, but I took all the prerequisites for medical school. And I said, if I'm going to medical school, I want to go to the best one. I thought that was Johns Hopkins. So that's the only medical school I applied to. And I got in, and I went to Hopkins. And then in my training at Hopkins, I thought that Hopkins had the best surgery. So I wanted to stay at Hopkins. So it's the only place I ranked for surgery. And at the time, when I finished, I was the first black person to finish the general surgery program in the history of Hopkins.
Wow. That's incredible. What position in football?
I was a running back in football.
A running back. How about baseball?
Center field, batted leadoff, was All-American for 2 years.
Let's talk about this. I'm interested, intrigued on your athletic background, because I know as a running back, that is probably the most involved position in football, right? Because you're in every play. You got to know every play. You're either blocking, you're carrying the ball, you're never just, lollygagging. So how are you able to balance and at center fielder, again, you're waiting for the ball and you're batting leadoff, you're setting the tone, right? You're cutting off any extra base hit, you're commanding the outfield, and you're setting the tone also on that field. So you're a born leader. But I want you to tell me, as a young person aspiring to become a trauma surgeon, which was again your goal, how were you able to balance everything? 'Cause I think that's a very mature thing to have at such an early age.
Right. And I think you used the word balance several times, and it's very popular today. They talk about work-life balance, other type of balance. And I don't believe in balance. I study Eastern philosophy, Taoism, have written a book about it, but we don't have to talk about it. It was a bad book contract. I only get 8 cents a book, so I'm not marketing my book. And in the Tao, they talk about being present in what you're doing. And it's sort of the opposite of multitask and balance. And so when you think about balance, you have to be doing two things at the same time in order to balance it, or else you can't balance it. When you have a scale, you got one weight on one side, one weight on the other side, and you balance them out. You got work over here, life over here, you balance them out, family, work. And what the Chinese would say, and the Japanese, who stole many things from the Chinese, took it to the extreme, is that you do one thing at a time and you do it well. So when I was working to play baseball, I focused on the baseball. And when it was time to study, I focused on the study. And when it was time to hang out with my friends, I hung out with the friends. And I set schedules for all of them. But I never, and I still don't now, I don't do two things at the same time. So people at work know that I don't check emails after 5 o'clock because I'm home. And I don't check emails on the weekend unless I'm on call. And so I don't do balance. I do one thing at a time. So when I'm home, I'm home. When I'm at work, I'm work. So when I was growing up, I would be practicing to get in shape for baseball, but I also knew what kind of shape I needed to be in for football. So I'd mix some of those things in. So I was practicing to be a better athlete. But then when it was time to study, I did my studying. And then I would get up in the morning and do my studying, then practice after class. And so now I already had my work done. So then if I wanted to hang out with friends, I had time. But I never then, when the test was coming, I didn't have to like, oh my God, I got to stay up to 3 o'clock in the morning studying for the test because I've been doing work all along.
Listen, you just said something that was on my docket to talk about. And that is the power of mindfulness and the inability for the human brain to multitask.
That's correct. I'm trying to get monotask into the English language instead of multitask. So for all the people listening to the podcast, your job after listening to this is to use monotask in a sentence the next day in your life.
And you're right, multitasking is a myth. In other words, when people say multitasking, the problem is there's no such thing as multitasking. As multiple studies have confirmed, true multitasking, doing more than one task at the same time, does not exist. People who think they can split their attention between multiple tasks at once aren't actually getting more done. The study also suggests that the brain is incapable of performing multiple tasks at one time, even after extensive training. What the brain can do, it can process multiple things at once. The study also indicates that while the brain can become adept at processing and responding to certain information, that's why you can look at a ball, catch it, and throw it, right, almost simultaneously. You cannot truly multitask. So let's use that analogy of mindfulness and the inability to multitask as you became a surgeon. As you became a surgeon, and the trajectory to becoming a surgeon is the epitome of multitasking, or at least the attempt to do that.
Yes. And most of the people think they are multitasking, but then what happens is they forget to take care of themselves and they struggle with things. And now the big phrases are they need wellness days, they need time off, they can't get triggered and all those other sorts of things because they haven't spent the time taking care of themselves. So I even schedule the time that I want to waste. So I love listening to certain sports talk shows. So I tape them, and when I come home, I allow myself a certain amount of time to actually watch them. And when I watch them, I enjoy them. I'm not thinking about anything else I need to do or focus on. I'm enjoying that show. And what I tell the students is like, if say you like video games and you come home and you think you should be studying, but you play the video game. But what happens is, because you think you should be studying, you're not enjoying the video game as much as you should because you think you should be studying. But you're not studying. And so then when you go to study, you feel bad because you should have been studying sooner, but you were playing the video game. And so what I tell people is, you go home and say, I'm going to spend whatever time you want, hour, half hour, hour and a half playing my video game. Enjoy the hell out of that video game while you're doing it. And then when it's over, you put it up and you study. So now you have time to study and you get your work done. But you also enjoyed the video game better. And your studying will actually be more effective because you won't feel guilty that you did the video game when you should have been studying. And so that's an example of enjoying the monotask and being present with what you're doing instead of trying to multitask and fit stuff in and do things like that.
And people tend to think that being a multitasker is a superpower, but the superpower is really in the ability for us to monotask.
That is correct.
Right?
That's
because,
correct.
And let's talk about cell phones. Cell phones is something that I love to talk about when we talk about mindfulness and monotasking. They call them cell phones for a reason, because CELL, cell phone, it becomes your prison, right? You become a prisoner of that cell phone. So I want you to tell my listeners.
I might have to steal that from you. I like it.
That's okay.
I might have to steal it.
Listen, that's all right. We can steal from one another.
Okay.
But one thing that I want you to tell my audience is, you have been a practicing surgeon before cell phones.
That's correct.
Right? And now, so what has been the change in the clinician that you have seen? And I totally agree with you, especially a surgeon who one distraction could be deadly. How have you managed to keep yourself monotasked in a world that has become multitasked?
Well, the key to getting good at anything, I think, is practice. So I practice being focused, and I practice being disciplined. And so and I practice also being patient. And so I use every opportunity that I can to practice that. So I love pumpkin desserts this time of year. It's my one weakness. And so I will buy my favorite pumpkin dessert and sit it on the table in my apartment and look at it for a day. And then I'm having an opportunity to practice discipline and patience. And you can't get good at something unless you practice. So with your cell phone, you have to just practice not picking it up. And you can't it's hard to do cold turkey. It takes real willpower to do cold turkey. So it may be the text goes off and you say, I'm not going to pick it up for 5 seconds. And then the next week you plan on 30 seconds. And then pretty soon you're able to ignore that text. The other thing is, my phone is sitting next to me, but I turned it off. So no one can get me now. And so when I have a meeting, if you schedule a meeting with me, I turn my phone off and I turn my computer off so the time is yours. And then I don't wear a watch, so I'm not keep going and looking to see what time it is. And what people have told me is that meetings with me are actually quicker. We usually schedule them for a half hour or an hour, and they usually are 15 minutes or 45 minutes, because since we're focused on what we're doing, we get it done. And some people think that I embarrass them when I say the following sentence, but I say it anyway. When they look at their phone, I say, well, I thought you wanted to meet with me, but you're on your phone. I said, I gave you my time because you wanted to meet with me, but now you're on your phone. So when you're finished with your phone, let me know and we can start the meeting again. But I don't keep talking when they look at their phone, because I'm not going to let them attempt to multitask and not focus on me. They wanted to meet with me.
It's the power of undivided attention. I think dopamine addiction is a big thing, right? People want that instant gratification.
Right.
Right. And they look for those boom, 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 because that gives you that dopamine.
Right.
You know, they become dopamine junkies. Right. So we do need to detoxify that. But I believe in the power of mindfulness. And I'm someone who falls victim quite often to the multitasking, because I want to make sure I have, a very large staff. We were comparing numbers on nurse practitioners.
Yes.
I'm trailing you by a few, but I'm getting close to you. So there are a lot of different clinicians that I oversee here. And again, I want to give everybody my time. But I do think that the more you multitask, Dr. Porter, the more that and unfortunately, the more you put on to multitask, it starts affecting. Go back to that dopamine junkie and that response, that instant gratification, serotonin, oxytocin, all those neurotransmitters. It affects your mental health.
Oh, 100%.
So let's switch gears and talk about the mental health of a surgeon. And I talked to you about this in the pre-screening. There are the three top professions that struggle with mental health: physicians, dentists, police officers. And how do you deal, and how do your colleagues deal with mental health, where you guys are at the top of the list? Because again, you guys are demanded to do something that is neurologically not normal.
Correct. Well, there's a couple things there. In one, the suicide strikes everyone. And we have a peer support group that offers help to people who ask for help. But sometimes the person who is struggling doesn't even ask for help, and they get missed. And then you send out, a wellness group from the police to their house, and you find bad news. But we have a peer support group that it will offer help to everybody. And then we do grand rounds where we talk about it and have the psychiatrists come, people from peer support come, specific to the surgeons, and remind them to take care of themselves. One of the things that I do personally for my trauma surgeons is every morning we do what's called morning report. We talk about all the patients that came in the night before, what their plan is for the day, any other people that are really sick that we need to do some work on. And then the students are there, the residents are there, the nurse practitioners are there, and we educate and talk, and that's nice. Then I kick everyone else out except the faculty. And then we just sit and talk and tell stories, talk about our kids, talk about our plans, what we're doing. And we're not really talking about the patients at that time. We're talking about ourselves. And I think that opportunity is our wellness day. And I don't think that you really should have a wellness day. You should have wellness in every day and take your time out to take care of yourself every day. And I think that's what we do. And one of the things that's beneficial is that we have one of the highest engagement scores when they do the scores in the hospital, even though we have one of the toughest jobs, and we have the lowest turnover. We've only lost one person in the 8 years that I've been there that has left. And so we have no turnover. We have the highest engagement score, but we do 24-hour call and have between 15 and 25 people die each month because the injuries, we can't save them. So you would think that we would be the ones that would be getting burned out and all of that. And I think the antidote to being burned out is to be happy at your job. Because what Confucius said is that if you choose a job you love, you never work a day in your life.
You bet.
And if you look, if technically a trauma surgeon got burned out, they would switch and become an artist or own a car dealership. But what they do is they say they're burned out at one trauma center and they get a job at another trauma center.
You take yourself with you.
Right. So what that means is they weren't really burned out at the first one. They just weren't happy with their people and their boss and all those other sorts of things because they didn't switch careers. They switched jobs and locations. And so I argue with my daughter all the time because as a clinical psychologist, she believes in burnout, and a lot of other people do. And I always say that burnout doesn't exist. And then she says, well, you stick to operating and I'll stick to the mind and you be quiet. And she's my daughter, so I have to give her props for that because she did get her PhD at age 25. And like I said, I tell stories. So I graduated from medical school when I was 26, the typical age, 18 from high school,
22,
22 and 26. My daughter was going to turn 26 on March 18th. She defended her dissertation on March 17th so she could be a doctor one day before turning 26 and then say that I was a doctor, that she was a doctor
before you
than me.
There are fallacies, I think, that we discover when we have intelligent discussions. And I think one of the reasons I wanted to have you on our podcast is because back to the multitasking, back to the fallacies, I think sometimes you find out that a lot of what we believe is not real if you have an intelligent discussion about it. And, one thing that has always concerned me about medicine is the outside perspective that is all glitz and glamour.
Yes.
that is all glitz and glamour. That being a surgeon, you live in a mansion, you drive a Maybach, you have a chauffeur, and no one understands the effort and the day-to-day mental warfare that a surgeon goes through. When you have a surgery that fails, when you have a surgery and you try your hardest, like you said, to save someone's lives, and you unfortunately can't. So let's talk a little bit about that life that's not so glamorous, that life that's not so glitzy, that life that, quite frankly, humbles, that surgeon mindset and potentially burns people out. I also think that burnout is a fallacy. I had a conversation with somebody this morning, and she said to me, Andre, I have zero drama in this job. And I find myself that in my previous job, that's all I did.
Right.
And I said to her, you don't reach out to me. And she goes, I don't have to. Because I used to reach out to you for drama. I used to reach out to you to complain. Complain, again, goes into the whole mindfulness aspect. It prevents us from being happy.
Right.
But I want to talk about, again, let's talk about that life that people don't normally get to see, about Dr. John Porter, where you had a struggle, adversity, crisis, those moments that the families are crying and you're crying with them. The times that the families are mourning and you're mourning with them. So tell me about that.
Well, I mean, it's really hard at 2:00 in the morning. You just laid down for a second. You're physically tired. Your cell phone goes off saying that there's a trauma coming in, because we don't carry beepers anymore. We have everything through the cell phone. And then you get down there and you find out that it's a young 16-year-old that's been shot. And you open up the chest and you're squeezing the heart, trying to stop the bleeding and doing all the things you know how to do, and it doesn't work. And then you turn to all the team and say, is there anything else that we haven't tried that you think will work? And everybody says, no, we did our best. And then we look at the clock, because medical examiner wants to have an exact time, and we say it's 2:29 and we call it. But then we have to go out, and the family's been sitting in a special room. And then as soon as you walk in, they all stand up and did he make it? And then you try to tell the story so that you can say that he didn't suffer, that you did all these different things, but then he didn't make it. And then they interrupt you and say, so he's dead. And then you have to say yes. And then sometimes they get silent. Sometimes they want to grab you and hug you and cry. Sometimes they just go on the floor and start screaming, and then you're just there and you have to deal with that. The problem is that there may be another trauma in 5 minutes. And the worst thing that can happen is for me to be upset when that next one comes in and I mess up on the next one because I was upset about the last one. So I can't let it get to me, because I can live with doing my best and the person not making it. It's hard to live with you messed up and you should have saved him and you didn't. So I can't go back and be crying when the next one comes in, because then I might make a mistake. And so then that's built up, and sometimes that might happen once a shift. Sometimes it might happen 3-4 times a shift, and then your shift is over. And so that's where that morning report thing comes in, because that's when we check in with each other. And on a case like that, they might say, well, I did this, this, and this. And then me as the boss will say, sounds like you did everything perfect. Then the algorithm was right, the order was right, your technique was right, your management decisions were right. Sometimes the bullet wins, sometimes the car wins. There's nothing you could do. And then that reassures them, so that when they go home, they're not replaying it in their mind, wondering if they did the right thing. And then I check on them later in the day and do that, so they know that somebody cares about them. And I think that works, because it's hard. You could be, nothing against a pediatrician, dermatologist, a doctor like that, but you can go years, maybe even your whole career, without seeing anybody die. And like I said, we sometimes have 15 to 25 a month that die.
Well, listen, I give you a ton of credit. And I wanted the audience to hear that because I think the surgeon's perception is that it's glitz and glamour, and you guys are, bringing the money home by the buckets and have your scrubs that are always nice and impressed. When in fact, I don't think there's a more psychological warfare profession than yours.
Right. Everybody talks about life and death.
You guys
But,
see it.
but we do life and death.
Yeah.
And everybody makes difficult decisions every day in their job and important decisions that are in their job. But most of the time, if you make the wrong one, no one has died. Even if you're in finance and you cause somebody to lose $1 million, they're still alive and they have a chance to make some more money. If I make a mistake, people are dead.
Simple as that.
Right. But the other thing is I tell my people and I tell myself, I can't complain about that because I chose it.
Correct.
No one made me be a trauma surgeon.
Correct.
So I can't complain about how hard it is in terms of dealing with life and death and how much pressure it is and how many hours I have to work because I chose it. Even though I said I was going to do it at age 4, once I got into medical school, I could have picked a different specialty.
Sure. Let's talk about that. If you had the opportunity to go back and do it all over again, what would you have done?
Well, I ended up being drafted by the Dodgers out of baseball because I was an All-American. And I had won a scholarship to go to Hopkins. And I asked Hopkins if they would delay the scholarship so I could try to play baseball. And they said no. And back then, when you're drafted out of college, it sounds special. But if you're really, really good, you're drafted out of high school.
Correct.
Which means I was good, but I wasn't like really, really good.
Right.
And so the contract they were offering me wasn't going to pay for medical school. So I had to make the decision that was wise because most of the people who go to the minor leagues in baseball never make it to the major leagues. But most people that go to medical school end up being a doctor.
Correct.
Because what do they call the person that graduates last in the class?
Doctor.
Doctor. What do you call the person who's on the bench in the minor leagues?
Broke.
Yeah. And so I made the right decision. So if I was to go back, I wouldn't make a different decision because it was the right one. The samurai have a saying, and I used it with someone just yesterday. When you know what to do, there is no decision.
I like that. So I'm gonna make it even more challenging for you. So let's say medicine couldn't be an option. What else would you have done? Be a baseball player?
If I could not have become a surgeon, I would have taken that option to go to the minor leagues and try.
Love that.
Because those are the only two things I've ever wanted to be, was a baseball player or a surgeon. So, my father always wanted to play baseball, but he had to go to work. So his thing was he wanted me to play baseball. That's why I remember being 4 and hitting the baseball. And he had studied it enough to know that most of the greatest hitters were actually right-handed.
Correct.
But batted left-handed.
Correct.
And the reason for that, if you're right-handed, you're right eye dominant. And if you bat left-handed, the right eye has an unobstructed view. So he made me bat left-handed as a 4-year-old because he wanted me to end up playing baseball.
Yep. That's it. That's exactly right. Smart dad.
Yes.
All right, so let's talk about your. I can't believe we've talked for 30 minutes and we haven't done your bio. We can always switch this up on the podcast, but I want to go through your bio, and then I want you to tell our listeners a little bit more about what you do now, your day-to-day. So Dr. Porter, in his role as an assistant dean for clinical affairs at Cooper Medical School of Rowan University, Dr. Porter assists Dr. Anthony Mazzarelli, Associate Dean for Clinical Affairs, in overseeing affiliations and interfacing with Cooper University Healthcare on clinical affairs and matters. So this is the allopathic MD medical school with Rowan, correct?
Yes.
Dr. Porter, a professor of surgery, is head of the Division of Trauma Surgery and director of the Center for Trauma Services at Cooper University Healthcare, the level 1 trauma in the area.
Correct. We're also level 2 pediatric, and we're the busiest trauma center in the tri-state region. So we see more patients in the trauma centers that are in Philadelphia, more patients in the trauma centers that are in Delaware.
Beautiful. He earned his medical degree from Johns Hopkins University, as he said, in Baltimore, Maryland. Know that school very well, where he also completed his general surgery residency. Dr. Porter completed a fellowship in trauma critical care at the Hospital of the University of Pennsylvania. Know that hospital well, too. In 2023, the New Jersey Department of Health selected Dr. Porter to serve as the state trauma medical director. This is a recognition of Dr. Porter's expertise, leadership, and experience in the field of trauma care. In this role, Dr. Porter provides subject matter expertise to assist the leadership of the New Jersey Department of Health in the development and implementation of the statewide trauma system plan. He guides the State Trauma System Advisory Committee to plan, develop, and enhance the statewide trauma system plan, and develops quality assurance standards for trauma care and assist in the implementation of quality improvement for programs of trauma care in New Jersey. Let's talk about that, Dr. Porter. So, again, what you do for Cooper is incredible, right? I think the reputation at Cooper is well noted. But what you do for the state as the state trauma medical director, tell me a little bit about that.
So the interesting thing is that we spend a lot of time talking about the trauma surgeon, but the key to the trauma system is not the trauma surgeon or the trauma center, but EMS. Because EMS has to bring the patient to the right hospital at the right time. And so as state trauma medical director, I participate with EMS so that their triage protocols and their care and whatnot is standard through the state. So that if you get a car crash in northern New Jersey, you get a car crash in southern New Jersey, everything will be the same. And so trauma surgeons are important, but EMS are equally important. And so working with EMS and standardizing things is really the first task in that. Because the hospitals are a little more standardized already, because the American College of Surgeons comes and visits the hospitals and they have to pass certain criteria. And so the main focus is working with EMS, but not just working with EMS, making sure they're taking the right patient to the right hospital at the right time, but working to make sure that EMS is getting the appropriate credit and acknowledgement for the difficult and important job that they do.
Gotcha. That is, you know what? I never thought about that. Yeah. I never thought about the connection between, because you're right, a good EMS system makes a good surgeon.
Correct. If EMS takes 40 minutes to get someone to me, then they're bleeding for 40 minutes. If the same patient gets to me in 20 minutes, there's a better chance that I can actually save them. And so EMS is key. The way I tell it is, if you're an elective surgeon, you make your money and your life off of the people that refer you patients. No one goes to the colon surgeon. No one goes to the neurosurgeon. They go to a primary care or a specialist or somebody else, and they get referred there. My referring physician is EMS.
That's amazing. I never ever thought about that, and you're so right. And they're the ones that, quite frankly, they're your triage nurse.
They're the supply chain.
Wow, that's incredible.
I like to call them the referring physicians, because to me, that elevates them appropriately to my level, because I'm a physician, and now I've elevated them to that level, because they are that important to the trauma system by saying they're my referring physician. So I am now the medical director of supply chain.
Okay.
So that means I'm in charge of approving all the medical devices and things that come into the hospital, whether it's for neurosurgery, whether it's for cardiology, whether it's for the stroke doctors and all of that. So not just for trauma surgeons. And the story is actually interesting, and it shows how you can progress. So I don't have an MBA, never did anything like that. So I went to the CEO and said, I'm pretty good at being a trauma director, so if there's anything else that you need me to do, let me know. So we happened to end up joining an aggregation group, better known as a GPO. I won't say the name of it because I don't want to give anybody plugs that they haven't deserved. And so he said, we need a physician champion for this. And I said, okay, I'll be the physician champion. And so I ended up sending an email to the cardiologist saying, what pacemakers are you using? Because the pacemaker contract was coming up. And they did not answer me. So I went to the chief physician executive and said, I need a title and I want to be medical director of supply chain. And he goes, well, we don't have any money for that. And I said, I didn't ask for any money. I asked for the title. Because physician champion is basically a BS title.
Correct.
Whereas medical director carries a little weight. So they sent out an email naming medical director. I sent the cardiologist the same email. He answered me because he figured I can help him get his stuff. And so now I'm the medical director, supply chain, run those things. I redo the whole value analysis process. But now at the aggregation group, I'm on the clinical committee. But because I had some different ideas and did some talking, ended up being the chair of the clinical committee for the whole organization.
That's pretty neat.
So all 100 hospitals, I'm now the chair of the clinical committee for them. But then once I got on the clinical committee, I said, there's no doctors on your board. The board is just full of CEOs and stuff, but the doctors are the ones that have to use the products and can move the market share and do all that. So you should have a doctor on the board.
Don't tell me you got yourself on the board.
So now I'm on the board.
Stop.
So all this took 4 years. And so now I'm in charge of about maybe $1 billion worth of spend and no MBA or nothing. And so you can progress without having all the stuff if you say yes to things and have confidence in your own ability and then go home and do the homework. So I had to learn all the terms. I had to learn all the phrases. I had to learn all the different equations and how they talk and how they think. But I said to myself, I can save people's lives. I can figure out finance.
Right. There's a beautiful thing that happens when you believe in yourself, and when you have confidence in yourself, what happens is you unlock opportunities.
Right. And that's my mother's fault, because as the youngest of 7, and she won't admit it, she's been gone for a long time, but I was her favorite. And the proof of that, if anybody else is listening and they want to argue, is that she had 6 boys before, but she didn't name any of them after her father until I came. And then she named me after her father. So I was her favorite. And she told me that I could do anything I wanted to because I was special. And so I believed that. So when they asked me to be the champion and I said I want to be the medical director of supply chain, I didn't even know what a GPO was. I had to look it up and study it. But it gave me something to do, and now I'm on the board.
That's amazing. And listen, it gives humility to a profession that sometimes lacks it, right? It gives humility to an industry that sometimes, again, doesn't think that there isn't any. You open up yourself for opportunities, like Einstein would say. It's not what you know, but it's finding out the amount that you don't.
Right.
Which is an incredible thing. Something I want to tell my audience too is, again, you come here looking very scrappy. You're in good shape. Tell my audience what you do, because again, as a surgeon, you have to stay in shape, right? You have to stay in shape because your job, like you said, you're giving bad news, and mentally and physically, you got to prepare for the next tragedy, which is not if, but it's inevitable. It's coming.
Right.
So what do you do to stay in shape? I know you're into martial arts. And again, I think I wouldn't want to see you in a dark alley anytime soon. So tell my audience what you do.
Well, see, I do Aikido, which is more of a defensive martial art. If you've seen the Steven Seagal movie,
Yeah.
you know that. I actually trained with him in California. I've actually thrown him once. He threw me too numerous to count times, but I've thrown him once. And so I would not be dangerous in the dark alley unless you attacked me. But if you attacked me, it would be over. And you're right. You need to take care of your body. But I think all doctors need to take care of their body. And then I'll then extrapolate. Everybody needs to take care of your body, because it's I'm not going to say it's your temple, but it's what you have to walk around the planet to get anything done. And if you don't take care of it, then you can't walk around the planet healthy and get anything done. And whether getting anything done is cooking dinner every night for your kids, or raising your kids, or going to a job, or whatever it is, you can't do it once your body's not doing what it's doing. So I get up every morning at 5 o'clock and go to the gym. And on the days that I teach martial arts in Philadelphia, I don't want to do 2 workouts on the same day. So on that day, I don't go to the gym because I'm going to get my workout when I go to martial arts. And then you have to understand your body. So as you age, you can't do what you used to do. So if I'm going to do a 24-hour call on a day, I don't go to the gym that day because I only have a limited amount of energy to make it through that day.
Sure.
And so why I can't use it at the gym. And then because I think resistance training is important to keep the muscle mass up and the bone density up, I hired a trainer and I work out with a trainer twice a week. So for those 2 times, I do strength training. And then when I'm on my own, I do cardio. And then on Thursday, when I teach my class, I do the martial arts. And so that tries to keep me in shape.
Let's talk about that. You just hit on something that I want the listeners to consider. The number one risk factor for older adult decline, and considers to be actually the number one risk factor for decline, period, is frailty.
Correct.
Weakness.
Correct.
Specifically, lower extremity weakness, quadriceps dorsiflexion weakness, which is your ankle muscles. But quite frankly, I want you to tell the audience, a lot of the effect that you see out there with patients, unfortunately, pre-morbid status really determines how somebody's going to recover. The stronger you are on the outside, the stronger you are on the inside.
That's correct.
For someone who sees, we don't have to get graphic here, but for somebody who sees the body, unfortunately, in precarious positions, please tell my audience the importance of staying in shape, the importance of being strong. And quite frankly, you guys do a frailty metric, which I believe to be the 6th vital sign right now. Why is staying in shape so important, not only for the aesthetics of it, but just for the overall efficiency of systemic function?
Right. Well, one of the main ones, since 42% of all of our trauma patients are people who have fallen. And if you're in shape, your mind's in shape, your body's in shape, you have your balance, you're less likely to fall. The other misnomer is that people say I fell and broke my hip, and that's actually wrong. The hip breaks first,
and then you fall.
And then you fall. And the hip breaks first because you're frail. And so that's why a certain percentage of people who have fallen and broken their hips will all be dead in a year because they don't have the reserve to recover because they're frail. And so they need to take care of that. Now, I can't do anything about the frailty after the person's been in the car crash. But what we do, since we get CT scans on most people when they come in, unless they're dying right in front of us and we don't have time, we look at the psoas muscle in the abdomen, because that one really shows how much you've been moving and your balance and all of that. And when it's a certain size, we actually measure it. Then we know that person's going to have to go to rehab, and we get PT earlier. We get a PM&R consult earlier and do those sorts of things. So I can't fix the frailty before the car crash because I don't know who's getting in the car crash. But if they have frailty by some signs that we measure, and we found that this one be the most reliable, then we get the folks that can help the recovery involved sooner. And we like to think that helps improve our mortality. And we have one of the lowest mortalities in folks over the age of 65 who have a blunt multi-system trauma, the most severely injured elderly patients. The way we score that is based on all their comorbid conditions and what injuries they have. A certain number of them are expected to die. So that'll be the denominator. And the numerator is the number of folks that actually die in your hospital compared to people around the country who have that. So you want that O to E ratio to be under 1, which means that we're saving more of the people that should have died based on that expected number. And our number for that elderly blunt multi-system group is in the 0.7 range, which is pretty low.
Wow. And just for my listeners, the psoas muscle, that's basically your core muscles, right?
Yes.
That is what determines your strength.
Correct.
That's an amazing revelation, because in the outside world, right, in the non-surgical inpatient world, we measure the strength of a patient by their ability to do trunk stabilization, bed mobility, getting out of bed, getting out of the floor, which again is significantly attributed to the core muscles. Amazing. All right, I don't want to let you get off that easy. Let's go back to your military background.
And just because I'm enjoying myself, I'm going to bring something else up before we do that because I think it's important to talk about. Because I have another title that wasn't there.
Oh, give me another title.
I'm also the medical director of diversity.
Oh, I want to hear that.
And so,
see, you should have given me a better bio.
Well, my mother told me that should does not exist. Stuff either is or it isn't. And so I didn't give you a better bio.
Because you wanted to surprise me.
Because now I can surprise you and we can talk about it. And this can be spontaneous as we go on.
Love it.
And no one can say that it was prepared and all of that. So everybody remembers May 25th when the unfortunate murder of George Floyd happened.
Sure.
So at that particular time, we did not have a diversity office at Cooper. So I chatted with the CEOs and whatnot, and we have co-CEOs, and one of their superpowers, if you want to use that phrase, is that they listen. So I chatted with them and said, it's time for us to have a diversity officer. We're a little bit behind the times in that. And they said, yeah, we are. And so they agreed to hire a diversity officer. But the diversity officer is in charge of diversity for the whole organization. So that's security, housekeeping, everybody. So they hired an appropriate person for that who had that experience. But that person never worked in the hospital. So then what do you think I did? I went back to the CEOs and said, this person needs some help because she doesn't know how to deal with doctors. So you need a medical director of diversity.
I love it.
And then they said, who should that be? And they laughed because they knew I was going to say me. So then I became the medical director of diversity. And so now I work hand in hand.
That's not an easy job right now, Dr.
No, but
Porter.
I work hand in hand with the CEOs and that person to improve diversity. But the one thing that I've done is I said that every chairman or chief of a center, they had to look at their quality metrics based on diversity. And not because we don't just want more diversity. We want more diversity because it leads to better outcomes. So we just don't want to hire people. We want to prove that hiring the people do that. And so my trauma department is one of the most diverse departments probably in the country. It's led by a Black man. We have two Asians. We have a woman from Sri Lanka. We have 9 female trauma surgeons. We have two people that are Hispanic origin. We have 1 Jewish person. And then hope your listeners don't get offended, but we have 1 token white guy. But then if you look at our metrics, and this is interesting, I talked about that O to E ratio, and you want it less than 1. The group that has the lowest O to E ratio for mortality, length of stay, complications, and readmissions is Black men.
Really?
The second lowest is Black women. The third lowest is Hispanic men. The next lowest is Hispanic women. And so we've turned diversity into practice by paying attention to our diverse population in Camden.
Do you think that's socioeconomic in nature?
Well, no, the interesting thing is, and we're trying to figure out how we can publish this and talk about it, we also do all the emergency general surgery. So if you come in with appendicitis or something like that, we do that too.
Sure.
And when I look at diversity for that, the worst outcomes are Black men and Black women. And so what that means is they've been sitting at home, didn't have access to care, et cetera, for these emergency general surgery problems.
Which is socioeconomic.
Which is socioeconomic. Trauma is socioeconomic in terms of penetrating trauma. There's more gunshots and stabbings in underrepresented groups. But
awareness.
But the care is immediate to the trauma center. But they've done studies that at EDs, they give less pain medicine to Black people than they do to white people for femur fractures. And there's must be some unconscious bias there. Our group has no unconscious bias in anything. And so we're delivering the care, and it could be. And the thing that I want to point out for your listeners and for you is when I said that the highest one is for the white men, it's still close to 1. So it's still where it needs to be. We're not killing white people. I don't want people to get the wrong idea off of my sentence. The numbers are good. They're just better for everybody else, which is what diversity really wants is good for everybody.
Of course.
They don't want better for one group. They want good for everybody. And that's what we have. And I think diversity is important. And the phrase that I use is that diversity needs to be seen, and then equality needs to be experienced, and then inclusion needs to be felt. That's what DEI stands for me when I'm doing my medical director of diversity stuff. But we've taken away from just numbers in the faculty to the quality that we're given to our diverse patients.
I absolutely love that. And I think it creates an emotional investment into the emotional bank accounts of your team.
Right.
When they're able to build that empathy, when they're able to build that relationship with you that unfortunately in a very fast-paced environment like trauma surgery doesn't occur.
Correct.
So now, tell me about your military background.
So everybody all my brothers were in the military. So I felt that it's the proper thing to do, but I didn't want to be a private. So I waited till I was finished and went in as an officer.
Smart.
And then, but I also my plan wasn't to advance in the military and become a general and do all that sort of stuff. So every time I was up for promotion, I didn't fill out the packet. And I stayed a captain so that I was always just providing good trauma care to the soldiers, which is what I wanted to do.
Got it. Okay, that's great.
Right. But then because Dr. Shavanis, who is one of the people that works for me, still had his connection with the military, he's fostered that. And we now have a whole section of military affairs and diplomatic affairs so that he is in charge of leading and teaching the Special Forces medics, the Guardians who work for the State Department, FBI, National Guard. We just had the Pentagon here yesterday, and we're looking at doing some fellowships and some other things. And we have a great working relationship with the military and allow those Special Forces medics. So they go out and learn all the Special Forces things, but then they learn how to be a medic. And then before they're deployable, they spend time with us so they can practice all their stuff because we're so busy. And then because he has the military background and the tour de force with the military, they like us. And then because of my military background and trust in him, when he asks for something, I just say yes. And it's just been growing exponentially. And they're always asking us to do more. And we always say yes. And that points out one of my things on leadership is never be the first one to say no. And so whenever we're in a group and someone says, can we do that? I always say, yes, we can. And they said, how do you know you can do it? And I said, because we're trauma surgeons and we figure it out. And I leave it. But even when I've said yes, I know that somebody else is going to say no. And so when they say no, they get to be the ones that get blamed for not doing it. And I build up all this credit with everybody. So then when I go to the administration and say I need something, they're willing to help us out. So as a guide, you don't want to be the first one to say no in the thing. But you know what happens when you raise a new idea in a group? Everybody raises their hand and says why it can't be done.
Right.
No one's raising their hand saying why it can be done.
Correct.
So I just sit there and say, yeah, we can figure it out. And they say, how? I said, I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out.
The biggest disability in life is a bad attitude
Yeah.
and a mentality that you can't do something.
Right.
I've listened to you the past hour, and I love, whether you're a baseball player, a trauma surgeon, a medical director of supply chain, a professor, a father, a husband, a martial artist, a board member, and a medical director of diversity. And I'm sure I missed them here.
You forgot author.
An author.
Published author.
Author. But behind a great man has to be a great woman. Tell me about your spouse, your support system. Tell me who is the foundation. I'll describe it like this. Dr. Porter is the penthouse. I want to hear about the lobby, the ground floor, the foundation that has allowed you to really grow professionally where you are now.
Well, all through residency, in the beginning of my career, I had the world's greatest wife. We are no longer together, but we are still great friends.
Amazing.
And we raised our kids with the same principles, so we didn't have an argument on that area, and that's why our kids have turned out great. when my son was going to move from Providence to DC, and he wanted to find a place to live, he invited both his mother and I to go with him to help him pick out a place. When he was getting ready to defend his PhD at Northwestern, as luck would have it, I was going to be there for a meeting because I was on the board, and so I arranged for his mom to come out so that she could be there and celebrate it too. And so we raised our kids together, and we still take care of them and make sure they're fine. And if I ever needed any help, I know she would help me. And if she needs anything, she knows she can ask me too. We just couldn't stay married anymore, but we're just still best friends.
I love that. Listen, my parents divorced when I was very young, and I always look to, but they maintain a very amicable relationship. Right. Mm-hmm. And I always say to myself, that was a big proponent of again, you look up to that. That's the example that you want. And it takes maturity.
Yeah.
It takes maturity to do that. I don't think that the intellect of a trauma surgeon is ever questioned, but the emotional intellect of any human being is.
Yes.
Because it doesn't matter what scores you have on the SATs. It matters how you're able to react at the time of adversity, especially when it's personal.
Correct.
So that's important. So as we wind down, a couple questions that I still have for you is, I want you to clear the record here with our listeners. What are some of the myths that you hear sometimes about trauma surgeons, about the inpatient hospital life, that you want to clear the record, or some things that you might have heard and you'd be like, that's not how that happens? Let me just give you kind of the reality. What are some of those things that come to mind?
Well, the first one that comes to mind is that we do it for the money. And trauma surgeons don't, for sure, because there's easier ways to make money than to stay awake all night and have to talk to people about their loved ones having died. There's easier ways to make money. Because if you look at it, even for a non-trauma surgeon doctor, you got college, then you got medical school, then you got residency, then you got a fellowship. By the time you start making money as a non-training doctor, some of the people you went to college with, they're partners in law firms and senior vice presidents. And they don't have the loans that you have to pay back. So we don't do it for the money. But everybody thinks because we make more money than the average person, which we do, that we're doing this for the money. We're not. There would be much easier ways to make money. The other myth about trauma surgeons is that we don't care about our patients, because they're coming in by ambulance, they're not picking us, and it's not like an elective surgeon that develops a relationship with that. No, we still care about the patients, and we still hurt with the family, and we have discussions. The other discussion that's difficult that we didn't mention is we've done everything we can to save the person's life, and they're still technically alive, but we know they're not going to make it, and they're not going to have a quality of life. And then we have to talk to the family about, withdrawing care. That's a difficult decision. It's a difficult decision for the family, of course, but it's also a difficult decision for us because we spent all that time trying to save the person,
right.
And now we then have to switch and say that we really failed. And then your failure is laying right there in the bed looking at you. Most people can hide their failures and not have to talk about it.
Yeah.
And so the myth that we don't care is really true. Sometimes, like I said, you don't get to see it because we have to be ready for the next patient, but we still care.
It is important for you to become desensitized about your failures to have that future success.
Correct. But you also have to look at your failures. You can't hide it. You have to actually look at it and say, did I do everything right? Did the system do everything right? And you have to look at it honestly, because if you don't look at it honestly, the same mistake could happen and someone else could die. And so your failures are right there in your face.
It's been almost natural for me to have a conversation with someone who just so easy to talk to. And I'm going to give you a huge compliment. I know you're very proud of all of the titles that you have, but I'm going to give you one more. I'm going to give you one more, and I think this one it's one that you're going to carry and overarches all of the titles that we have here. You are a very genuine person, a very thoughtful human being. And besides all of the accolades that you have, I'm going to give you one more title. You're a champion of life. You're a life champion.
I will take that one.
You're a life champion. You make life better, not only for the people that you treat, but for anybody who has the privilege and the opportunity to be around you. Just the past hour, I feel like I'm better because I spoke to you. I'm better because I'm around you. You make life worthwhile. That's being a life champion. Whether you're fighting for diversity, whether you're fighting for supply chain. You know how many of your colleagues could care less about the supply chain in a hospital, but yet care enough to complain about it till the cows come home, right? The level of intellect of a life champion is not somebody who identifies a problem, but it's somebody who identifies a solution. It takes it upon themselves to get that solution and does what others won't. If you want to get what others can't, do what others won't. And that's the definition of a life champion. I give you a ton of credit. It was a privilege, a pleasure to meet you. Your kids, anyone who's around you, your staff, I hope they are valuing the life champion that they have leading them right now.
Well, thank you for the kind words. I'd like to think that's what I do. And the martial arts training, the official definition of a sensei is one who was born before. And so I try to give people benefit of all the years that I have and what I've seen and what I've studied and experienced. And with that, I try to treat them right. And I think if you treat people right, good things happen.
And it's our mission here to hopefully leave healthcare better than we entered it. And I tell you, I think you're going to leave this world much better than you entered it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that compliment.
And we are changing the habits of yesterday by creating the new healthcare reality of tomorrow. Thank you, Dr. Porter. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.